In 2022, a national airline was, on paper, worth less than nothing. It owed more than it owned, and its own auditors refused to promise it could survive the year. Its losses had passed $1 billion. Its liabilities outran its assets by more than $1.5 billion. Its own stock exchange was drawing up the papers to throw it off the market. A flag carrier, drowning. That airline is Vietnam Airlines. So how, barely 4 years later, did it walk into a room in Washington and order 50 brand new Boeing 737 jets for around $8 billion? The answer runs through a Soviet ghost fleet, 3 deadly crashes, a rescue no private airline on Earth could ever get, and this is not made up or a scene out of a movie, a survivor lost in the jungle for 8 days. Stay with me for this deep dive into this remarkable airline. To understand the comeback, you first have to understand how unlikely this airline was in the first place. Vietnam Airlines was born in 1956, not as a business, as an arm of the military. 5 Soviet propeller planes in a country about to tear itself apart in war. For the next 2 decades, it flew almost nothing the outside world would recognize. Only in 1986, when Vietnam started opening its economy under the reforms, did demand for flying really begin to climb. The airline finally had a reason to grow. It just had almost no way to do it. War, isolation, and an American trade embargo locked it out of Western technology. And here is where it gets strange. In 1990, the airline tried to bring in 2 Airbus A310 jets. It had to cancel because the engines were American and the embargo banned them. And then it got more absurd. In 1991, the carrier leased a single Boeing 737 and painted it in Vietnam Airlines colors. The United States forced the lessor to pull it back. The workaround was almost comic. The jet could fly for Vietnam Airlines only if it was based outside the country, wearing no logo, no name, nothing. A flag carrier with a secret plane it was not allowed to label. Its Soviet jets were so loud they failed the noise rules at Hong Kong's old Kai Tak airport. So to reach Hong Kong at all, the airline had to strike a 50-50 deal with Cathay Pacific. It could not even fly there on its own. The chaos was not only mechanical. In 1992, a former South Vietnamese pilot hijacked a Vietnam Airlines jet, dumped anti-communist leaflets over Ho Chi Minh City, and parachuted out. That was the world this airline was trying to grow up in. Then, in 1994, the sky seemed to clear. President Bill Clinton lifted the embargo, and suddenly Vietnam Airlines could buy Western metal. It announced it would dump its Soviet fleet as fast as it could. But that old fleet had already written the darkest chapter in the airline's history, and it was about to come due. Because before the modern jets, there was blood. Between 1988 and 1997, Vietnam Airlines suffered 3 fatal crashes. Every single one involved a Soviet-built aircraft. Every single one happened on approach or landing, and every single one happened in bad weather. The first came in September of 1988, a Tupolev Tu-134 flying from Hanoi toward Bangkok. It flew into a thunderstorm and exploded short of the runway. 76 people died. 4 years later, a much darker story. The 14th of November, 1992, a Yakovlev Yak-40 left Ho Chi Minh City for the coastal town of Nha Trang. A tropical storm swallowed it and it slammed into a mountain ridge. 30 of the 31 people on board were killed. There was one survivor, a Dutch woman named Annette Herfkens, badly injured, alone in a dense jungle. Rescuers could not reach her for 8 days. Yep, you heard that correct. 8 days. But she lived. Then came the worst of them all. It was on the 3rd of September, 1997. Vietnam Airlines Flight 815, another Tupolev Tu-134, on a short hop to Phnom Penh. In heavy rain, the captain pushed the approach far below the safe height. His first officer told him to pull up. His flight engineer told him to pull up, but he ignored them both. The jet clipped the trees 300 meters short and burst into flame in a rice paddy. 65 of the 66 people on board died. The only survivor was a 14-month-old boy. To this day, it remains the deadliest plane crash in Cambodian history. I can hear you saying out loud that an airline with a record like that should never win back its reputation, but here is the twist. After 1997, Vietnam Airlines did not have another fatal crash, not one. The Soviet ghosts were retired and the killing stopped. The worst modern scare was almost gentle by comparison. In 2006, a Vietnam Airlines Boeing 777 flying to Frankfurt lost contact with air traffic control for over an hour. 2 Czech fighter jets were scrambled to fly alongside it before the crew finally switched the radio back on. Embarrassing, yes. Deadly, no. And that is the whole point. What replaced them was one of the faster reinventions in Asian aviation. The airline leased Airbus A320 jets from Air France. It brought in the Boeing 767, then the Boeing 777. It officially became the national flag carrier in 1993. The wider corporation took shape in 1995, built by merging 20 separate aviation companies into one. The state kept control, and it still does. Today, the Vietnamese government owns more than 86% of the airline. Japan's All Nippon Airways Holdings holds a little under 6%. The rest trades in Ho Chi Minh City under 3 letters, HVN. In 2015, Vietnam Airlines pulled off something only a handful of carriers ever have. It took its first Airbus A350 and its first Boeing 787-9 in the same year. 2 brand new generation wide bodies at once. It added the stretched Boeing 787-10. It filled in with the Airbus A321 family. By the end of the decade, this airline, from a developing country, was flying one of the youngest wide-body fleets in the region. Average age, around 10 years. Strip out the turboprops and the budget arm, and the main fleet today runs to around 96 jets. The A321 family is the backbone. The A350s and the 787 Dreamliners do the long-haul heavy lifting. In 2010, it became the first Southeast Asian carrier to join the SkyTeam alliance, and that mattered a lot. It plugged a once isolated carrier into a global network overnight, the same alliance as Delta, Air France, and Korean Air. The airline that could not even reach Hong Kong on its own was now selling tickets across the planet. In 2021, it launched its first nonstop flight to the United States, from Ho Chi Minh City to San Francisco. It was never just one airline, either. Vietnam Airlines built a group. Its low-cost arm, Pacific Airlines, has one of the strangest histories in the country. It started in 1990 as the very first budget carrier in Vietnam. Then, Australia's Qantas bought in, and it became Jetstar Pacific. Then, in 2020, Vietnam Airlines bought Qantas out and turned it back into Pacific Airlines. The little airline nearly died in the pandemic, too. At one point, it handed back every single one of its planes. Then, there is VASCO, a regional turboprop carrier, wholly owned, flying small ATR 72 planes to places the big jets ignore. Remote islands like Con Dao and tiny coastal airports in the south. It began back in 1987, doing aerial photography and survey flights. For years, Vietnam Airlines even ran a joint national airline inside Cambodia, before selling out of it in 2020. The group does more than fly, too. It fixes planes for dozens of other airlines, runs catering, and trains its own crews. A whole aviation ecosystem grown inside one state company. By 2019, the parent airline turned a healthy profit. It looked like a confident, rising carrier in one of the fastest growing travel markets on Earth. And that confidence is exactly what set the trap. Because here's the part that flips the whole story. That gleaming modern wide-body fleet, the A350s and the Dreamliners, the thing that made Vietnam Airlines look world-class, it was not the airline's strength. In 2020, it became the bomb under the floor. Vietnam Airlines was built around international flying, long routes, big, expensive, wide bodies, foreign tourists, and in 2020, all of it vanished at once. When the pandemic grounded the planet, it did not dent this airline. It detonated it. The borders slammed shut. The tourists disappeared. And those beautiful wide bodies, the pride of the fleet, sat parked on the tarmac, burning money in financing and parking fees, earning nothing. Domestic flying crept back first. But the long-haul international routes, the ones that actually made the money, stayed frozen far longer. The wide bodies kept bleeding. This was not a rough patch. It was a threat to the survival of one of the country's largest companies, with the nation's name on its tail. The numbers are brutal. In 2020, Vietnam Airlines lost close to $500 million. In 2021, it lost more than $550 million. By the middle of 2021, something happened that had never happened in the company's history. Its equity turned negative, which simply said means that it owed more than it owned. And it got even worse. By the time the dust settled, its accumulated losses had climbed past $1 billion. Fuel, which can eat a third of an airline's costs, punished it. Exchange rates moved against it. Every lever was pulling the wrong way. And by mid-2022, its liabilities outran its assets by more than $1.5 billion. Deloitte, its auditor, attached the warning every company dreads, the going concern flag. In plain language, they could no longer assume it would keep flying. Then came the second blow. Under Vietnamese law, a listed company faces forced removal from the market if it loses money 3 years running, or if its losses swallow its capital, or if its equity falls below zero. Vietnam Airlines was on track to trip all three at once. Its own stock exchange placed it under control and started the countdown. And yet, and here's the really strange part, even as the airline sank deeper into the red, its share price stayed stubbornly high. Investors were not pricing the business, they were pricing something else. They were pricing a rescue, because they were almost certain one was coming. Guess what? They were right. In 2021, the Vietnamese government stepped in with a package worth around 12 trillion dong, close to $500 million. Part of it was a loan of 4 trillion dong, handed over at a preferential rate, money no struggling private company could dream of. The rest came from forcing fresh capital in. A share sale of roughly 8 trillion dong, bought by existing shareholders, which mostly meant the state. The government was, in effect, writing a check to itself to keep its own airline alive. Think about how circular that is. The majority owner reaching into the treasury to rescue the company it already owns, protecting an asset whose real value was never financial, it was national. Behind the scenes, the airline fought too. It renegotiated leases, it deferred payments, it sold older planes. It even erased more than 4 trillion dong of debt tied to Pacific Airlines through an aircraft return deal. Lawmakers waved through tax relief and waived penalties that no normal company would have escaped. Now, a fair person asks the obvious question, why this airline? Vietnam has other carriers, Vietjet, Bamboo Airways. They got no zero-interest lifeline. They were told to compete on a field that was never level. The case for saving it was real. A country of 100 million people needs reliable air links. And the flag carrier flies routes that matter but barely pay. The thin ones, a pure budget airline, would simply drop. Someone has to fly them. In Vietnam, that someone is Vietnam Airlines. And the honest answer is actually uncomfortable, because a flag carrier is not treated like a business. It is treated as infrastructure, as foreign policy, as the face of a nation written across the sky. Letting it die would have meant handing the country's air links and a mountain of national pride to private rivals and foreign airlines. To the Vietnamese state, that price was simply too high. So it paid. And the bet worked faster than almost anyone expected. As borders reopened, Vietnam Airlines did not just recover, it broke records. In 2024, it posted a pre-tax profit of about 7.7 trillion dong, that is more than $300 million, not just a return to the black after 4 years of losses. The highest profit in its entire history, more than double its best pre-pandemic years. It carried almost 23 million passengers. It pushed each jet to fly around 11 hours a day. In 2025, it went even further. A record revenue, around $4.7 billion, more than 25 million passengers carried. Its busiest, richest year ever, in its 30th year of operation. Which brings us back to that room in Washington that I mentioned in the beginning of this video. On February 18 of 2026, Vietnam Airlines finalized an order for 50 Boeing 737 MAX jets. List price, around $8 billion. And here is why that matters more than the money. For its entire history, this airline bought Airbus for its short-haul jets. Always. This was its first ever Boeing 737 order. The first time an American narrowbody beat Airbus on Vietnam Airlines' home ground. And remember where this started. 3 decades ago, an American embargo would not even let this airline keep a Boeing 737 with its own logo on it. Now, its most senior leader, the head of the Communist Party, stood in Washington beside the boss of Boeing and signed away $8 billion for 50 of them. Orders this size are never just about planes. This was diplomacy with wings. It was part of a bigger wave. Across that same visit, Vietnamese carriers committed to close to 100 Boeing jets, worth tens of billions of dollars, as Hanoi worked to cool trade tension with Washington. Vietnam Airlines was the flag on the front of it. But here is where I also stop making it sound like a fairy tale, because the comeback is not finished. Even after that record year, Vietnam Airlines still carried negative equity, still, on paper, owed more than it owned, by more than $400 million at the end of 2024. The deep scar of the pandemic has not fully closed, and part of that record profit came from one-time gains, like the debt it wrote off, not purely from flying. The airline is buying brand new jets and clawing out of a financial crater at the very same time, and the accumulated losses tell the same story. By the close of 2024, they still topped $1 billion. A hole dug that deep does not fill in a single season. Still, it is betting big on what comes next. For 2026, it is aiming to carry more than 29 million passengers. It is reshaping itself around a giant new airport rising outside Ho Chi Minh City at Long Tan. A fleet target of roughly 150 aircraft by 2030, and more than 200 by 2035. Dozens more wide bodies on the wish list. Even a brand new cargo airline, built by turning passenger jets into freighters. For a carrier that spent the pandemic selling planes just to survive, it is now buying them by the dozen to grow. So here is what I actually think. Vietnam Airlines is both things at once, and that is what makes it fascinating. From one angle, it is a real triumph, dragged back from the dead by discipline, brutal restructuring, and patience. From another, it is a company that was rewarded for failure, kept alive by rules bent in its favor and money no rival could ever touch. Both are true. And that is the strange nature of every flag carrier on Earth. Too important to fail. Too political to judge by normal rules. Vietnam Airlines did not survive because the market decided it deserved to. It survived because a government decided the country could not be seen without its own wings in the sky. So let me leave you with this question. If an airline can lose $500 million in a single year, sink below zero, and still be handed the cash to buy 50 Boeing jets, is that a nation proudly protecting something precious? Or is it a warning about what happens when a company learns it will always be caught no matter how far it falls? Tell me which side you land on in the comments. And if you got something out of this video, hit like and subscribe to Explain for more stories like this one. Thank you for watching this video, and I will see you in the next one.